The morning sun cast warm light across Willowbrook Estate's manicured gardens. Hollis Quinn adjusted his tie and checked his watch. 30 minutes until his sister walked down the aisle to marry a man whose family name carried weight in every boardroom from Seattle to Portland. "You clean up nice." Lorelei appeared beside him, her dark hair pulled back in a simple twist. She wore a navy dress that brought out her eyes. After 8 years of marriage, she still made his chest tighten when she smiled. "Maris will be happy you came," she added, smoothing his lapel. Hollis nodded. "She's my sister." The words came out flat. Truth was, he'd barely spoken to Maris in 6 months. Not since she'd announced her engagement to Tanner Maddox. The name alone set his teeth on edge, though he couldn't put his finger on why. They took their seats in the third row as guests filed in around them. Hollis recognized faces from the local business community. City council members, tech executives, old money and new money mingling under white tents decorated with roses and baby's breath. "Expensive wedding," Lorelei murmured. "Maddox money." A string quartet played soft classical pieces while ushers guided latecomers to their seats. Hollis spotted Tanner at the altar, tall and sharp in his black tuxedo. The man had presence. Controlled. Professional. Everything Maris had said she wanted. The music changed. Everyone stood. Maris appeared at the back of the aisle in white silk and her grandmother's pearls. She looked beautiful. Happy. For a moment, Hollis felt the old protective instinct kick in. His little sister, 28 now, but still the kid who used to follow him around construction sites when their father took them to work. She walked toward Tanner with steady steps, her smile bright and confident. Hollis tried to focus on her joy instead of the knot in his stomach. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Traditional vows. Ring exchange. When a minister pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Hollis clapped along, watching his sister kiss her new husband. During the cocktail hour, he nursed a whiskey and made small talk with other guests. Lorelei moved through the crowd with natural grace, but he noticed her staying close to his side. Usually she enjoyed these events more than he did. "Having fun?" he asked when she returned from the bar with a glass of wine. "It's lovely." Her voice sounded distant. Dinner was served at round tables under the main tent. Hollis found their assigned seats near the back, away from the head table where Maris sat with Tanner and both sets of parents. He could see his sister laughing at something Tanner whispered in her ear. The Maddox patriarch, Errol, commanded attention at the head table. Silver-haired and broad-shouldered, he had the bearing of a man used to getting his way. Hollis had met him briefly during the receiving line. Firm handshake, polite conversation about the weather and the beautiful venue. When the toast began, Errol stood first. His voice carried easily across the tent as he welcomed Maris to the family and spoke about building legacies that lasted generations. The crowd hung on every word. Hollis glanced at Lorelei. She'd gone pale, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Her eyes were fixed on Errol Maddox with an intensity that made Hollis lean closer. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer immediately, just kept staring as Errol continued his toast about the importance of family and tradition. When the applause died down, Lorelei grabbed Hollis's arm. "We need to leave. Right now." The urgency in her voice cut through the ambient noise of conversation and clinking glasses. Hollis had learned to trust his wife's instincts over the years. When Lorelei said something was wrong, it usually was. "What happened? Please, just trust me." Hollis looked around the tent. Maris was glowing at the head table, completely absorbed in her new husband and in-laws. Other guests were settling in for what would likely be hours of dancing and celebration. "Now, Lorelei, now." He stood without another word. They gathered their things and made their way toward the exit, nodding politely at other guests but not stopping to chat. Hollis caught Maris's eye across the tent and waved goodbye. She looked confused but smiled and waved back. The valet brought their car around quickly. Hollis tipped the young man and slid behind the wheel while Lorelei buckled her seatbelt with shaking hands. "You want to tell me what just happened?" She stared straight ahead as they pulled away from Willowbrook Estate. "Drive first. I'll explain when we're away from here." The winding road back to Seattle cut through dense forest and rolling hills. Hollis kept the speed steady and the radio off. Lorelei sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap. They'd been driving for 10 minutes when he finally broke the silence. "I've never seen you look at someone the way you looked at aromatics. Like you'd seen a ghost." Lorelei turned toward him. In the fading daylight, her face looked drawn and serious. "That man destroyed your family, Hollis. He's the reason your father killed himself." The words hit him like cold water. Hollis eased off the gas pedal, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "That's impossible. Dad's problems were with city contracts, building permits. The Maddox family wasn't involved." "Yes, they were." Lorelei's voice was quiet but certain. She'd stopped shaking, but her jaw was set in that way that meant she was working through something difficult. "I recognized him from the newspaper coverage back then. I was working at the city planning office, remember? I saw his photo in the business section dozens of times during the investigation." Hollis pulled over at a scenic overlook and put the car in park. Below them, the lights of Seattle sparkled in the distance. He turned to face his wife fully. "Start from the beginning." Lorelei took a deep breath. "Your father was bidding on that municipal complex project, the one that was supposed to set him up for years. He spent months preparing that proposal." Hollis remembered. Alaric Quinn had been excited about the job. It would have been the biggest contract of his career, enough to expand the business and maybe bring Hollis in as a full partner. "But someone else got the contract," Hollis said. "Maddox Development. They underbid your father by exactly 3%. Just enough to win without leaving money on the table. That's business. Happens all the time. Not like this." Lorelei shifted in her seat. "After they won the contract, suddenly there were problems with your father's other jobs. Safety violations that had never been issues before. Permit delays. Surprise inspections that found problems nobody else could see." The timeline clicked into place in Hollis's mind. His father's business had fallen apart over the span of 8 months. Job after job canceled or delayed. Citations and fines piling up. Lawsuits from angry clients. Dad said he was being targeted, but nobody believed him because Aromatics was smart about it. He didn't do anything that could be traced directly back to him. "But I watched it happen. I processed some of those permit applications. I saw the complaints that came in about your father's work." Hollis stared out at the city lights. "Why didn't you say anything then?" "I was 24 years old and barely out of college. Who was going to listen to me accuse one of the most powerful developers in the state? Besides, I didn't have proof. Just suspicions." But now she sounded certain. Hollis studied her face in the dashboard light. "You remember more than suspicions. I remember Aromatics coming to the planning office personally to file complaints about your father's work. 3 separate times. Each time with documentation that seemed a little too convenient, a little too detailed." The words settled into Hollis's chest like stones. His father had insisted until the day he died that someone was sabotaging his business. Everyone, including Hollis, had written it off as the desperate paranoia of a man watching his life's work crumble. "Dad tried to tell me someone was out to get him. I thought it was just bad luck and poor judgment. It wasn't." Lorelei reached over and took his hand. "Your father was right. And now your sister just married into the family that destroyed him." Hollis started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The rest of the drive passed in silence, both of them lost in thought. When they reached their house in Queen, and Hollis sat in the driveway for a long moment before turning off the car. "Maris doesn't know," he said. "Are you sure about that?" The question hung between them as they walked to the front door. Hollis wanted to believe his sister was innocent, that she'd simply fallen in love with the wrong man. But doubt was already creeping in around the edges of his certainty. Hollis couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Lorelei breathed quietly beside him. Every conversation with his father during those final months played through his mind in a new light. The paranoia hadn't been paranoia at all. That morning, he'd made a decision. After Lorelei left for her Saturday yoga class, Hollis drove across town to the storage facility where he'd been paying rent on his father's things for the past 5 years. Unit 47B. He'd only been inside once, right after the funeral, to pack up the contents of his father's home office. The metal door rolled up with a rusty screech. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each one labeled in his own handwriting. Tools. books, personal items, and in the back corner, a stack of boxes marked work files. Hollis pulled out the first box and opened it on the concrete floor. Construction blueprints, permit applications, correspondence with subcontractors, all the mundane paperwork of running a small construction business. The second box held legal documents, contracts, insurance forms, and at the bottom, wrapped in plastic, a manila envelope marked for Maris and Hollis. If they ever care. Inside the envelope was a thumb drive and a handwritten note in his father's careful script. I know you both think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. But if something happens to me, these files will explain everything. I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. I'm just a man who got in someone's way. Love, Dad. Hollis stared at the note for a long time. Then he gathered the thumb drive and the most recent work files and loaded everything into his truck. Back home, he plugged the thumb drive into his laptop and opened the first folder. What he found made his stomach clench. Dozens of documents, email correspondence, meeting notes, financial records, all organized with the methodical precision of a man building a case. The story they told was devastating. Maddox Development had systematically undermined Alaric Quinn's business through a network of corrupt inspectors, bought-off permit officials, and carefully orchestrated complaints. They'd started with the municipal complex bid, using inside information to undercut his father's proposal by exactly the right margin. When Alaric had started asking questions about the bidding process, they'd escalated. Surprise inspections that found violations where none existed. Permit delays that cost him jobs. Anonymous complaints that triggered investigations and fines. Hollis found copies of documents showing payments from Maddox Development to city officials. Vacation packages for inspectors' families. Campaign contributions that preceded favorable permit decisions. His father had been building a case, piece by piece, documenting a conspiracy that reached into multiple city departments. But the most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation between Errol Maddox and a building inspector named David Cross. Hollis played the file through his laptop speakers. His father's voice came through clearly. "Mr. Cross, this is Alaric Quinn. I'm calling about the inspection report on the Belmont Street project. What about it? The violations you cited don't match the actual conditions on site. I have photos showing the work was completed to code." A pause. Then Cross's voice, defensive and aggressive. "Are you calling me a liar, Quinn? I'm saying there's a discrepancy. One that's cost me a $30,000 contract. Maybe you should be more careful about your work. Maybe you should be more careful about who's paying for your family's trip to Hawaii." Silence. Then Cross again, his voice lower. "You better watch yourself, Quinn. Keep pushing this and you'll find out how much trouble a contractor can get into in this city." The recording ended. Hollis sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. His father had been gathering evidence of systematic corruption, and someone had been threatening him for it. But he scrolled through more files. Bank records showing suspicious payments. Email chains discussing the Quinn problem. Meeting notes from Maddox Development Strategy sessions. And at the bottom of the final folder, a document that made his blood run cold, a background check report on Maris Quinn. Her college records. Employment history, dating relationships. The report was dated 6 months before she'd met Tanner Maddox, before she'd allegedly met him. Hollis read the document twice, making sure he understood what he was seeing. Maddox Development had researched his sister thoroughly before Tanner ever approached her. They'd known about her family connections, her father's suicide, her estrangement from Hollis over their father's final months. That it hadn't been a chance meeting. It had been a calculated approach. The front door opened, and Lorelei called out that she was home. Hollis quickly closed the laptop and went to meet her in the kitchen. "You look terrible," she said, setting down her yoga mat. "Did you sleep at all?" "I went to Dad's storage unit." Her expression shifted immediately. "What did you find?" Hollis told her everything. The thumb drive, the recorded conversations, the evidence of corruption and intimidation, and finally, the background check on Maris. When he finished, Lorelei was quiet for a long time. She made coffee while processing what he'd told her, moving through the familiar motions while her mind worked. "Maris knew," she said finally. "The background check doesn't prove that. They might have researched her without her knowledge." "Hollis, Lorelei turned to face him. She's not stupid. She would have figured it out. He wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. Maris had always been sharp, observant. If she'd spent months dating Tanner, getting to know his family, she would have connected the dots. The timing of her father's problems. The involvement of Maddox development in city contracts. She chose them over Dad's memory. Or she was scared. Or she thought marrying into the family would protect her somehow. Lorelei was trying to give his sister the benefit of the doubt, but Hollis could hear the uncertainty in her voice. They both knew Maris. She wasn't someone who acted out of fear. I need to talk to her. When? Now. But when Hollis called Maris's phone, it went straight to voicemail. Of course. She was on her honeymoon in Italy, probably somewhere without cell service. The confrontation would have to wait. In the meantime, he had decisions to make. The evidence his father had gathered was explosive, but it was also 5 years old. Proving corruption was one thing. Proving that it had driven his father to suicide was another. And there was the question of what to do with the information. Going to the police seemed like the obvious choice, but his father had already tried that route. The corruption went deep into city government. Who could he trust? Hollis spent the rest of the weekend reading through every document on the thumb drive. By Sunday night, he had a clear picture of what had happened to his father and why. Now he needed to decide what he was going to do about it. 2 weeks later, Maris returned from Italy with a tan and a satisfied smile. She called Hollis on a Tuesday morning while he was reviewing blueprints for a kitchen renovation in Capitol Hill. I have pictures to show you, she said, her voice bright with honeymoon happiness. Tanner took me to this amazing little restaurant in Tuscany where they've been making the same pasta for 300 years. We need to talk. Something in his tone must have warned her. The enthusiasm left her voice immediately. What's wrong? Not over the phone. Can you meet me for lunch? They arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant in Fremont, away from both their usual haunts. Hollis arrived first and chose a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. When Maris walked in, she looked nervous that she'd changed during the months leading up to her wedding. The casual clothes and minimal makeup she'd always preferred had been replaced by a more polished look. Designer jeans, professional blowout, expensive jewelry. She looked like she belonged in Tanner's world now. You look good, Hollis said as she slid into the booth across from him. Thanks. Italy was incredible. You and Lorelei should go sometime. They ordered coffee and made small talk about the trip while they waited for their food. Maris showed him photos on her phone of ancient churches and hilltop villages. She looked happy in the pictures, laughing at something Tanner had said or posing with her arms around his shoulders. When their sandwiches arrived, Hollis set a manila folder on the table between them. I found Dad's files. Maris went very still. Her hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. What files? The ones from his storage unit. The evidence he was gathering before he died. Hollis opened the folder and spread out copies of the most damning documents. The phone recordings. The payment records. The proof that Maddox Development had systematically destroyed their father's business. Maris looked at the papers, but didn't touch them. Her face had gone pale under her honeymoon tan. Where did you find these? Storage unit. He left them for us with a note saying we'd understand if we ever cared enough to look. The words hit their target. Maris flinched as if he'd slapped her. I cared. I just couldn't what? Couldn't face the truth about what really happened to him. Couldn't live in the past forever. Her voice rose slightly, then dropped back to a whisper. Dad was gone, Hollis. Nothing was going to bring him back. But you could have cleared his name. You could have made sure people knew he wasn't crazy or incompetent. Maris pushed the documents back toward him. What would that have accomplished? The people who mattered already knew who Dad really was. The people who mattered. Hollis felt his temper rising. What about his reputation? What about justice? What about moving on with our lives? They stared at each other across the table. Other diners chatted quietly around them, oblivious to the family confrontation playing out in the corner booth. Hollis pulled out one more document. The background check on Maris. What did you figure out? She looked at the report and her shoulders sagged. For a moment, she looked like the little sister he remembered instead of the polished woman she'd become. About 6 months after we started dating, I found some documents in Tanner's apartment. old business files his father had given him to review. And you said nothing. What was I supposed to say? That his family had destroyed ours? That our entire relationship was built on a lie? Yes, that's exactly what you should have said. Maris shook her head. You don't understand how deep this goes, Hollis. The Maddox family doesn't just own construction companies. They own politicians, judges, police commissioners. If I tried to expose them, they would have destroyed me too. So you joined them instead. I protected myself. And you, whether you want to admit it or not. Hollis leaned back in the booth. How do you figure? Do you think it's a coincidence that your business has done so well these past 2 years? Those referrals that came out of nowhere, the permits that got fast-tracked, the inspections that went smoothly. The implication hit him like a punch to the gut. His company's recent success hadn't been entirely his own doing. Someone had been pulling strings behind the scenes. Tanner's been protecting you, Maris continued. Because you're my brother. Because I asked him to. I never asked for protection. You didn't need to. I did what I thought was best for both of us. Hollis gathered the documents and put them back in the folder. You sold out Dad's memory for money and security. I made a pragmatic choice. Something Dad never learned how to do. The words hung between them like a slap. Maris immediately looked like she regretted saying them, but it was too late to take them back. Hollis stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. I hope it was worth it. Hollis, wait, but he was already walking away. He drove home in silence, his sister's words echoing in his head. She'd made her choice years ago. Now he needed to make his. That night, he told Lorelei about the conversation. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled as he recounted Maris's admissions. She's scared, Lorelei said when he finished. She's complicit. Maybe both. Hollis pulled out his laptop and opened the files again. Dad gathered all this evidence, but died before he could use it. Someone needs to finish what he started. What are you thinking? I'm thinking the Maddox family has been getting away with corruption for years because no one was brave enough to stand up to them. Maybe it's time that changed. Lorelei studied his face in the light from the laptop screen. This isn't just about justice, is it? This is about your sister. She was right, and they both knew it. Maris had betrayed their father's memory and chosen her own comfort over truth. Hollis couldn't forgive that. Wouldn't forgive it. If she wants to be a Maddox, then she can face the consequences along with the rest of them. Finding allies proved easier than Hollis had expected. Apparently, the Maddox family had made plenty of enemies over the years. Reeve Langley responded to Hollis's email within hours. They met at a coffee shop in Ballard on a rainy Thursday morning. Langley was younger than Hollis had expected, maybe 35, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of nervous energy that came from looking over your shoulder too often. You said you had information about Maddox development, Langley said without preamble. Hollis slid a folder across the small table. My father's files. He was investigating them before he died. Langley opened the folder and scanned the first few documents. His expression grew more interested with each page. Where did you get these? He left them for me. Took me 5 years to find them. Your father was Alaric Quinn. It wasn't a question. I remember reading about his suicide in the papers. The whole construction scandal. It wasn't a scandal. It was a setup. Langley closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. I know. I was working for Maddox Development when it happened. Low-level operations manager. But I saw enough to know your father was being railroaded. Why didn't you say anything? Who was going to listen? I was nobody. Fresh out of college with a business degree and student loans. Errol Maddox was already a legend in the industry. Langley had worked for the company for 3 years before asking too many questions about irregularities in their bidding process. He'd been fired on a trumped-up charge of misappropriating company resources and blacklisted from other construction firms through what he suspected was an informal network of industry contacts. Now I do compliance consulting, he said, mostly for small firms that want to make sure they're following regulations. It's not much, but it's honest work. Hollis studied the man across from him. Langley had suffered for trying to do the right thing, but he hadn't given up entirely. There was still fight left in him. I want to finish what my father started, exposing the corruption, destroying them, the way they destroyed him. Langley was quiet for a long moment. Rain streaked the coffee shop windows, and the morning crowd was beginning to thin out. That's not going to be easy. They have more money and influence now than they did 5 years ago. Politicians in their pocket. Contracts worth hundreds of millions. You said my father was being railroaded. That means you have inside knowledge of how they operate. Some. I kept copies of documents before they fired me. Nothing as comprehensive as what your father gathered, but it might be useful. They spent the next hour going through Hollis's files while Langley filled in gaps and provided context. The picture that emerged was of a family-run empire built on intimidation, corruption, and carefully orchestrated destruction of competitors. There's someone else you should meet, Langley said as they prepared to leave. Maren Chase. She's a journalist who's been investigating the Maddox family for years. Never heard of her. She runs an independent blog called Truth and Consequences. Does deep investigative work on corporate corruption. She tried to expose the Maddox family a couple years ago and got sued into silence, but she never stopped digging. Langley arranged the introduction, and they met Maren Chase at a bar in Georgetown the following evening. She was younger than Hollis had expected, maybe 28 or 29, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she didn't waste time on small talk. Reeve showed me some of your father's files, she said after they'd ordered drinks. It's solid evidence, but it's also old. Statute of limitations has probably run out on most of the criminal activity. I'm not interested in prosecuting crimes from 5 years ago. Then what do you want? I want to bring them down. Publicly. Completely. Chase took a sip of her beer and studied his face. That's going to require current evidence of wrongdoing. The old files are useful for establishing a pattern, but we need fresh material, such as financial irregularities, ongoing corruption, current bribes, or kickbacks. Something that will make prosecutors and regulatory agencies take notice. She explained that her previous investigation had focused on Maddox Development's political connections and campaign contributions. She'd found suggestive patterns, but nothing concrete enough to prove quid pro quo relationships. They're careful. Errol Maddox has been playing this game for 30 years. He knows how to stay just inside the legal lines. What about his son? Hollis asked. Tanner? He's cleaner than his father, at least on paper. Tech background instead of construction, but he's been getting more involved in the family businesses lately. Chase had been tracking Maddox Development's recent expansion into technology, consulting, and urban planning. They were positioning themselves to bid on smart city initiatives and green infrastructure projects. Big money contracts with lots of regulatory oversight. If they're cutting corners or buying influence on any of those deals, that would be current criminal activity, she said. How do we find out? We need someone on the inside. Someone with access to their internal communications and financial records. Langley shook his head. I've been out of there for 2 years. Don't have any current contacts. Chase turned to Hollis. What about your sister? She's not going to help us. Are you sure? Maybe if she understood what was really at stake. She knows exactly what's at stake. She chose them over our family. The conversation moved to other potential approaches. Chase had press contacts who might be willing to publish an expose if they had enough evidence. Langley knew former Maddox employees who might be willing to talk off the record. But they all agreed that the strongest approach would be to catch the family in the act of current wrongdoing. Something that couldn't be dismissed as ancient history or disgruntled former employees spreading rumors. I might have an idea, Hollis said as they finished their drinks, that he told them about his renovation business and the kinds of clients he worked with. Wealthy professionals, corporate executives, people who moved in the same circles as the Maddox family. I could try to get a contract with them directly. Some kind of renovation or construction project that would give me access to their facilities. Chase looked skeptical. They're not going to hire the brother of someone who married into the family. Too much potential for conflict. They might if they think I'm supportive of the marriage. If they believe I've made peace with the situation. It would require swallowing his pride and pretending to accept what Maris had done. But if it gave him access to the evidence they needed, it might be worth it. Langley nodded slowly. The Maddox Foundation is renovating their offices downtown. I saw the project listed in the construction trade publications. They're probably taking bids now. What kind of renovation? Executive offices, conference rooms, public spaces where they host donors and politicians. Perfect. Hollis could bid on the project as a high-end renovation specialist. If he got the contract, he'd have legitimate access to their facilities for weeks or months. It's risky, Chase warned. If they figure out what you're really doing, they'll destroy you the same way they destroyed your father. Then we better make sure they don't figure it out. They agreed to work together. Chase would continue her research from a journalism side, while Langley provided technical expertise about the construction industry. Hollis would try to get inside access through a renovation contract. As they left the bar, Chase grabbed his arm. I want you to understand something. These people have ruined lives and destroyed careers. If we're going to take them on, we need to be prepared for them to fight back. Hard. Hollis thought about his father's final months. The paranoia that hadn't been paranoia. The slow destruction of everything he'd worked to build. Let them fight. This time they're not dealing with someone who's going to roll over and die. Getting the Maddox Foundation contract required a performance that made Hollis's skin crawl. He reached out to Tanner directly, playing the role of the supportive brother-in-law who wanted to contribute to the family's philanthropic efforts. I know things were tense before the wedding, he said during their phone conversation. But Maris is happy, and that's what matters to me. I'd like to help with the foundation renovation, if possible. Tanner's response was cautious but interested. Your reputation in the industry is solid. I've heard good things about your work. Of course he had, because Tanner had been protecting Hollis's business interests for the past 2 years, smoothing the way for permits and referrals. The knowledge made Hollis's teeth clench, but he kept his voice neutral. I specialize in high-end renovations for professional spaces. The kind of work that makes a statement about an organization's values and mission. They arranged a meeting at the foundation offices the following week. Hollis spent the weekend preparing his proposal, including detailed plans for modernizing the space while preserving its historical character. He emphasized sustainability, accessibility, and the kind of elegant design touches that would impress wealthy donors. The Maddox Foundation occupied 2 floors of a renovated warehouse in Pioneer Square. The current offices were functional but dated, with worn carpeting and fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly gray. Tanner met in the lobby, looking every inch the successful tech executive in his tailored suit and expensive watch. He was polite but formal, treating Hollis like a contractor rather than family. The foundation has been in this space for 8 years, Tanner explained as they toured the offices. We've outgrown the layout, and the aesthetic doesn't reflect our current mission. Hollis took notes and measurements while they walked through conference rooms and executive offices. He spotted several opportunities to install hidden cameras during the renovation process. Electrical outlets that would need to be updated. Light fixtures that would require ceiling access. They ended the tour in Errol Maddox's corner office. The patriarch was on a conference call, but he waved them in and pointed to chairs while he finished his conversation. Hollis sat quietly and listened to Errol discuss permit timelines and contractor schedules with someone on the other end of the line. When the call ended, Errol stood and shook Hollis's hand with the same firm grip he remembered from the wedding. Tanner tells me you're interested in our renovation project. I'd be honored to contribute to the foundation's mission. What do you know about our mission? It was a test, and they both knew it. Hollis had researched the foundation thoroughly, memorizing their stated goals and recent initiatives, supporting sustainable development and economic opportunity in underserved communities. You focus on green building techniques and job training programs for young people. Errol smiled. Very good. And what would you bring to this project? Hollis launched into his pitch, emphasizing his experience with LEED certification and his commitment to using local suppliers and workers. He showed them renderings of other projects he'd completed, highlighting the kinds of details that would appeal to their donor base. Impressive work, Errol said when Hollis finished his presentation. Tanner, what do you think? The proposal is solid. His references check out, and having family involved sends a positive message about our values. Errol nodded. I agree. Mr. Quinn, the job is yours if you want it. They shook hands again, and Hollis felt a surge of dark satisfaction. The same man who had destroyed his father was now welcoming him into the heart of his operation. There is one condition, Errol added. We'll need you to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The foundation handles sensitive information, and we require absolute discretion from all contractors. Of course, the NDA was extensive, covering everything from client lists to financial information to internal communications. Hollis signed without hesitation, knowing it would actually work in his favor. If he was caught gathering evidence, he could claim he was simply documenting the quality of his work. Construction began the following Monday. Hollis brought in a small crew of trusted workers, including 2 who had agreed to help with the real mission, installing hidden cameras in executive offices, copying files left on desks during lunch breaks, documenting conversations that took place near their work areas. The Maddox Foundation staff treated them with polite indifference, the way wealthy people often treated service workers. They spoke freely around the construction crew, assuming laborers weren't intelligent enough to understand complex business discussions that IT was a mistake that would cost them dearly. Within the first week, Hollis had recorded conversations about permit expediting, political donations tied to specific zoning decisions, and pressure tactics used against competitors bidding on municipal contracts. Nothing earth-shattering yet, but enough to establish patterns of questionable behavior. The breakthrough came during the 3rd week, when Hollis was installing new electrical outlets in Errol's office. The older man was on a conference call that he apparently considered routine enough to conduct in front of the contractors. "David, we need to talk about the waterfront development timeline," Errol said into his speakerphone. Hollis recognized the name David Cross from his father's recordings, the same building inspector who had threatened Alaric Quinn 5 years earlier. "The permits are moving through the normal channels," Cross replied. "Should have final approval within 60 days. That's not fast enough. We have investors getting nervous about the delays. I can't just approve permits that don't meet requirements." Errol's voice hardened. "We've been generous with your family over the years, David. Remember that trip to Maui last Christmas? Your daughter's college tuition payments." A long pause. Then Cross again, his voice smaller. "What do you need?" 30 days. Find a way to expedite the approvals. That's going to require some creative interpretation of the regulations. Then be creative. That's what we pay you for." The call ended, and Hollis continued working as if he'd heard nothing more interesting than a discussion about office supplies. But his hand shook slightly as he stripped electrical wire, and his heart pounded with the knowledge that he'd just recorded evidence of active bribery. After work, he met with Langley and Chase at their usual bar in Georgetown. When he played them the recording, Chase's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. "That's it. That's what we needed. Cross is still taking bribes from them." Langley asked. "Sounds like he has been for years. College tuition, family vacations. They've got him completely compromised." Chase was already planning how to use the evidence. "We need more recordings like this. Financial documentation, if possible. Names of other officials who might be compromised." Over the following weeks, Hollis gathered a treasure trove of incriminating material. Photos of documents discussing illegal campaign contributions, recordings of conversations about fixing bid processes, evidence of safety violations being covered up through bribes and intimidation. The picture that emerged was of a criminal enterprise masquerading as a family business. The Maddox empire wasn't just cutting corners or bending rules. They were systematically corrupting public officials and destroying anyone who stood in their way. But as the evidence mounted, so did the risks. Tanner began showing up at the job site more frequently, asking pointed questions about the renovation timeline and watching the crew with suspicious eyes. "How much longer do you think this will take?" he asked Hollis one Thursday afternoon. "Another 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if we run into any unexpected issues. My father is eager to see the finished product. He's been very impressed with your work." There was something in Tanner's tone that made Hollis look up from the electrical panel he was installing. The younger Maddox was studying him with sharp, calculating eyes. "I appreciate his confidence. It's an honor to work on such an important project. Yes, the Foundation's work is very important to our family. We take threats to that work very seriously." The message was clear. They were watching him. If they suspected anything, the consequences would be severe. That night, Hollis called an emergency meeting with his allies. They met at a different location, a diner in West Seattle, where they were unlikely to encounter anyone from the Maddox orbit. We need to wrap this up soon, he told them. Tanner's getting suspicious. Chase nodded. I think we have enough evidence to move forward. The question is timing. They agreed to plan the public revelation for maximum impact. Chase would prepare a comprehensive expose combining Hollis's recordings with her own research and Langley's inside knowledge. They would coordinate the release with regulatory agencies and law enforcement to ensure the evidence received proper attention. There's one more thing, Hollis said as they prepared to leave. I want to be the one who tells Maris what's coming. She might warn them, Langley pointed out. Maybe, but she's still my sister. She deserves a chance to choose which side she wants to be on when this goes public. Chase looked skeptical, but she didn't argue. They agreed that Hollis would confront Maris while Chase prepared the final article for publication. The endgame was approaching. Soon, the Maddox family would face the same kind of public humiliation and destruction they'd inflicted on others. And this time, there would be no one to save them. The call to Maris went straight to voicemail 3 times before she finally answered. Her voice sounded distracted, busy with the kind of social obligations that filled her days now. Hollis? Is everything okay? We need to talk. In person. I'm pretty booked this week. Tanner and I are hosting a dinner party Saturday for some foundation donors, and I still need to cancel it. Something in his tone must have warned her. The casual chatter stopped. What's wrong? Meet me at Cary Park in an hour. Come alone. Cary Park offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline and Elliott Bay. On a clear Thursday afternoon, tourists and locals gathered to take photos of the Space Needle and downtown skyscrapers. Hollis arrived early and found a bench away from the crowds. Maris appeared 15 minutes later, looking anxious. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon sunlight as she sat beside him. You look terrible, she said. I've been busy. With work. With justice. Hollis pulled out a manila folder and set it on the bench between them. Same as their last meeting, but this time the contents were different. Current evidence instead of historical documents. Proof of ongoing crimes instead of past grievances. Remember when you said the Maddox family was too powerful to fight? That they owned politicians and judges? Maris glanced at the folder but didn't touch it. What have you done? I finished what Dad started. I gathered the evidence he died trying to collect. He opened the folder and showed her photos of financial documents, transcripts of recorded conversations, and detailed timelines of criminal activity. The case against her husband's family was comprehensive and devastating. These recordings are from the foundation offices. Conversations about bribery, permit fixing, political corruption, all within the past month. Maris went pale as she recognized voices and names in the transcripts. Her husband, her father-in-law, city officials she'd met at foundation events. How'd you get these? I've been renovating their offices for 6 weeks. Hidden cameras, audio recording devices. They never suspected the grieving son would be stupid enough to fight back. You're insane. Maris stood up abruptly, the folder sliding off the bench. Papers scattered in the afternoon breeze, and she scrambled to collect them. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you when they find out? Same thing they did to Dad. Try to destroy me through corruption and intimidation. It won't be the same, Hollis. You're not some small-time contractor they can push around quietly. You're family now. If you go public with this, you'll be declaring war on my husband. Hollis helped her gather the scattered documents. Your husband's family murdered our father. If you can't see that as a declaration of war, then you're more lost than I thought. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching ferries cross the bay below them. Families walked past with children and dogs, enjoying the beautiful afternoon. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the criminal empire operating in their city. What do you want from me? Maris asked finally. I want you to leave. Tonight, before this goes public. I can't just disappear. You can do whatever you want. That's what having choices means. Maris stared at the scattered documents in her hands. When? Soon. Days, not weeks. And if I stay, then you face the consequences along with the rest of them. She stood up again, this time calmly. The papers were organized now, neatly stacked and ready to be returned to the folder. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my brother. No, I'm telling you to choose between right and wrong. Your husband is irrelevant. Maris looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she handed him the folder and walked away without another word. Hollis sat alone on the bench until the sun started setting behind the Olympic Mountains. He'd given his sister one last chance to do the right thing. Whether she took it was up to her. The final pieces of evidence came together faster than expected. Chase had been working her sources in city government, and she'd uncovered additional proof of the Maddox family's corruption network. Payoff records going back years. Email chains discussing vote buying. Financial irregularities in foundation accounts. We have them, she announced during their meeting Friday night. Multiple felonies. RICO violations. Enough evidence to bring down the entire operation. Langley had contributed his own evidence from his time at Maddox Development, along with testimony from 3 other former employees who were willing to go on record about illegal activities they'd witnessed. The timing is perfect, Chase continued. The Maddox Foundation Gala is tomorrow night. Every politician and business leader in the city will be there. If we drop this story while they're all celebrating together, the optics will be devastating. Hollis thought about Maris's dinner party. The foundation donors gathering to celebrate their philanthropy while evidence of their host crimes was being prepared for publication. How do we coordinate with law enforcement? I've got contacts at the FBI and the State Attorney General's office. They'll receive copies of everything as soon as the story goes live. Search warrants should be ready within hours. They spent the evening finalizing their strategy. Chase's expose would be published at exactly 9 p.m. Saturday, during the peak of the Foundation Gala. The timing would ensure maximum media coverage and prevent the Maddox family from controlling the narrative. There's no going back after this, Chase warned them. Once this story breaks, we'll all be targets. They'll try to discredit us, intimidate us, maybe worse. Langley nodded grimly. I've been living with that fear for 2 years. At least now, I'll have company. Hollis felt a strange sense of calm. After months of planning and weeks of gathering evidence, the moment of reckoning was finally at hand. His father would have justice, even if it came 5 years too late. Let's burn it all down. The Maddox Foundation Gala was held at the Four Seasons, in a ballroom that sparkled with crystal and gold. Seattle's elite gathered in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, sipping champagne and discussing their latest philanthropic endeavors. Hollis watched the event coverage on the local news from his living room, noting the familiar faces among the attendees. City council members, federal judges, business leaders whose companies had benefited from Maddox family connections. Lorelei sat beside him on the couch, her laptop open to Chase's blog. The expose was scheduled to publish in 15 minutes. Are you sure about this? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. At exactly 9 p.m., Chase's article went live. The headline was devastating. Criminal Empire. How the Maddox family built a fortune on corruption and murder. Hollis's phone immediately started buzzing with notifications. Social media exploded as the story spread. News outlets picked up the story within minutes, their evening broadcasts switching to breaking news coverage. The article was comprehensive and damning. Chase had woven together 5 years of evidence into a narrative that exposed the full scope of the Maddox family's crimes. Bribery, extortion, bid rigging, political corruption, and at the center of it all, the systematic destruction of Alaric Quinn and the cover-up of the circumstances that led to his suicide. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings of current illegal activity. Financial documents showing years of illicit payments. Testimony from multiple witnesses describing the family's criminal operations. Within an hour, protesters had gathered outside the Four Seasons. News vans lined the street as reporters tried to get statements from gala attendees, leaving early. Cell phone video showed wealthy donors hurrying past crowds, chanting, "Justice for Alaric Quinn." Hollis's phone rang. "Maris, you did it," she said without preamble. "Yes. The FBI is at the hotel. They're arresting people in the ballroom." Hollis turned up the volume on the television. Live footage showed federal agents in bulletproof vests escorting handcuffed figures through the hotel lobby. He recognized several faces, including David Cross and 2 city council members. "Where are you?" he asked. "Home. I left the gala early." "Smart choice." A long pause. "Tanner's been arrested. They took him from our table in front of everyone." Hollis felt a surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by something that might have been pity for his sister. She'd chosen her side, and now she was facing the consequences. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "No, you're not. But that's okay. You were right about them. About all of it." The line went quiet except for the sound of sirens in the background. On television, a reporter was interviewing Chase outside the FBI field office, explaining how the investigation had uncovered years of systematic corruption. "What happens now?" Maris asked. "Now they face justice. The kind Dad never got. And us." Hollis looked at Lorelei, who was reading comments on the news articles. Support for his father was pouring in from all over the city. Construction workers who remembered Alaric Quinn. Small business owners who'd been pushed out by the Maddox family. Ordinary citizens disgusted by the corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. "I don't know," he said honestly. Maris was quiet for another long moment. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and I'm going to testify against them if the prosecutors want me to." "Why?" "Because you were right. About Dad. About justice. About doing the right thing, even when it's hard." It was more than Hollis had expected from her, but less than he'd hoped for years ago. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, even when the betrayer finally chose the right side. "Take care of yourself, Maris." "You too." She hung up. Hollis set his phone aside and watched the news coverage continue. By midnight, Errol Maddox had been arrested at his Mercer Island estate. The charges included racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, and accessory to wrongful death in connection with Alaric Quinn's suicide. The criminal empire was collapsing, just as his father's business had collapsed 5 years earlier. But this time, the destruction was visible and public and deserved. Justice, finally. Tanner found Hollis on a rainy Tuesday morning at a job site in Ballard. Hollis was reviewing blueprints with his crew when he looked up to see his former brother-in-law standing at the edge of the construction zone. Tanner looked different. Thinner. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved in several days. The arrest had clearly taken its toll. "We need to talk," Tanner called out. Hollis handed the blueprints to his foreman and walked over to where Tanner waited. The construction crew continued working, but he could feel them watching from the corners of their eyes. "You're out on bail," Hollis observed. "For now. My lawyers think I can beat most of the charges. I wasn't directly involved in the older corruption schemes, but you knew about them. Knowing isn't the same as participating." They stood facing each other in the drizzling rain. Tanner's carefully cultivated image of success and control had cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "What do you want?" Hollis asked. "I want you to understand what you've done. My father built something important in this city. Jobs for thousands of people. Affordable housing projects. Community development programs. Built on lies and corruption. Built on pragmatism. You think the city government functions on pure motives? You think those affordable housing projects would have happened without someone willing to navigate the political realities?" Hollis felt his temper rising. "My father tried to navigate those same realities honestly. Your family destroyed him for it. Your father was naive. He thought the world operated on merit and fair dealing. The real world requires compromise. The real world requires justice." Tanner stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You destroyed my family for your own revenge. Don't pretend this was about justice." The accusation hung between them in the gray morning air. Construction noise continued around them, but Hollis was focused entirely on the man in front of him. "You're right," he said quietly. "This was about revenge, but that doesn't make it wrong. My father is 70 years old. The stress of this trial could kill him. My father was 52 when yours drove him to suicide. I guess we're even." Tanner's composure finally cracked. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a bitter man who couldn't let go of the past. I'm a son who loved his father. Something you'll never understand. I love my father too. And you destroyed him." "No," Hollis said firmly. "I turned on the lights. Your father destroyed himself when he chose to build his fortune on other people's suffering." Tanner stared at him for a long moment, rain dripping from his hair. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Hollis watched him go, feeling something that might have been pity. Tanner wasn't entirely wrong. This had been about revenge as much as justice. But sometimes revenge and justice were the same thing. The trials dominated Seattle news for months. Errol Maddox was convicted on multiple counts of racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy. He received a 25-year sentence that would effectively be a life term for a man his age. Tanner plea bargained down to lesser charges in exchange for testifying against his father. He received 5 years in federal prison and agreed to forfeit most of his assets to pay restitution to victims of the family's crimes. David Cross and several other city officials were convicted of corruption charges. The city government underwent a major overhaul of its permitting and inspection processes. Maris testified for the prosecution as promised. Her divorce was finalized 6 months after Tanner's conviction. She left Seattle entirely, moving to Portland, where she started over with a new name and a job teaching elementary school. Chase won a Pulitzer Prize for her expose. The investigation sparked similar corruption probes in other cities, revealing a network of illegal activity that stretched across the Pacific Northwest. Langley started his own construction company, specializing in honest, transparent business practices. His first major contract was a municipal project that had been rebid after the Maddox corruption was exposed 0.6 months after the verdicts. Hollis stood in front of a new building rising in the Georgetown district. The construction site buzzed with activity as workers installed windows and finished exterior cladding. The sign at the entrance read, "Alaric Quinn Resource Center for Independent Contractors." The center would provide support services for small construction companies, legal advice, financial counseling, job training programs, everything his father had needed but couldn't afford during his final desperate months. Lorelei joined him at the construction fence, bringing coffee and sandwiches for the crew. She'd been instrumental in organizing the nonprofit that would run the center, using her connections from her time at the city planning office. "The dedication ceremony is next week," she said, handing him a steaming cup. "The mayor wants to speak." "He can speak, but this isn't about politics." "What's it about?" Hollis watched a crew of young workers learning proper safety procedures from experienced foremen. Men and women who would build careers in construction without fear of corrupt officials destroying their livelihoods. "It's about making sure what happened to Dad never happens to anyone else." The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the construction site. Workers called out to each other as they moved materials and positioned equipment. The sounds of honest labor building something useful and permanent. Lorelei slipped her arm through his. "He will be proud." "I hope so." They walked together toward the partially finished building, past signs advertising job training programs and small business support services, past the future that Alaric Quinn had dreamed of but never lived to see. The Maddox empire was gone, its foundations revealed as rotten and unsustainable. But from its ashes, something better was growing. Something built on the principles that Alaric Quinn had died defending. Justice and reconstruction, memory and renewal. The work continued.